Ons gesels vanoggend oor brandstof. Die Clean Fuels 2 regulasies moet in Julie 2017 in werking tree, maar kenners is van mening dat hierdie sperdatum nou onmoontlik is. Ons verwelkom vir Kevin Baart, hoof van strategiese projekte by die Suid-Afrikaanse Brandstofbedryfsvereniging. Good morning, Kevin, and thank you for joining us for this discussion.
Good morning.
What exactly are the Clean Fuel 2 regulations and what purpose do they serve?
If we go back to 2011, in 2011 the Department of Energy published a discussion document on regulations in terms of the way forward on what we want. And then in 2012, they in fact published new Clean Fuels 2 regulations, which would then come into effect on the 1st of July 2017, exactly the ones which you were talking about earlier. Now, the main direction behind the regulations is to pursue a particular government objective or government policy. And in this case, the policy is actually to ensure that the tailpipe emissions from motor vehicles are cleaner, are more benign, are better for the environment. But it's also to ensure that the automobile manufacturers of this country can bring in newer vehicles, and those newer vehicles themselves require the cleaner fuels in order to actually get the required tailpipe emissions and a little bit of fuel efficiencies associated with them.
So how do these regulations differ from the current fuel regulations in South Africa?
The current fuel regulations were enacted back in 2006, and those regulations are mainly associated with sulfur, the sulfur in petrol and sulfur in diesel. And what these new regulations do, they reduce the sulfur substantially in both petrol and diesel. The current regulations allow for something like 500 ppm in unleaded petrol. The new regulations will account for 10 ppm sulfur. Likewise for diesel, at the moment we've got 50 ppm sulfur diesel and 500 ppm sulfur diesel around. The new regulations will limit the sulfur content to 10 ppm.
I remember like back in the day when unleaded petrol was a new thing. I would say it felt like technology. You've got a car and it's unleaded and you're still in the old car. Just compare, if you compare petrol like in the 70s or 80s or early 90s, is it much more dirtier, if you can call it dirtier?
Well, in those days, 30 years ago, what they did was they added lead. It was actually called tetraethyl lead to petrol in order to actually increase the octane. Now, lead, we know, is actually it's poisonous, especially for young children.
Yes.
And studies all over the world have found an increase in lead in the lead levels in young children, and it in fact leads to brain damage, severe brain damage.
Sure.
So there was directive, and there was a real push to actually pull lead out of petrol. And I think there's only 2 countries in the world today which actually have lead in their fuel. So South Africa, thank God, got rid of lead in 2006, and now we've got unleaded, and we've also got lead replacement fuels around.
That is so interesting.
Now, these regulations are scheduled to be effective from July 2017. Is the scheduled implementation still possible?
Well, what happened was the 2012 regulations said the 1st of July 2017. Then last year, in early June, the Department of Energy published new draft regulations for comment. And those are, to all intents and purposes, very similar to the ones in 2012. There are 3 major differences associated with that. But what those regulations did, they allowed the implementation of cleaner fuels by notice of the Minister in the Government Gazette. So in other words, if these regulations are then gazetted, and we're expecting gazetting in the first quarter of this year, it will actually remove the 1 July 2017 implementation date.
What exactly is causing the delay, and what needs to happen before the regulations can come into effect?
Well, what is required is from the manufacturing sector, that's from our integrated members who have both manufacturing interests and retail and wholesale interests. It is required for them to actually upgrade their refineries. Now, the problem is this will cost a substantial amount of money. In a study which we did about 8 years ago, it's approaching $4 billion, which is a substantial amount of money. And the problem is there is no economic return for those investments. So the question is really, who will assist the refining industry in order to upgrade their manufacturing facilities in order to make the cleaner fuels?
Would you recommend postponing implementation, and what would the likely effect of postponement be?
Well, they are they will be postponed because there's no way that we'll be ready by 1 July 2017 in any case. And by virtue of the expected new regulations, they will be postponed, probably sometime in the next decade. And then what is really required, and we're working with the Department of Energy on this, is to get some type of financial assistance for the refining sector in order to actually upgrade the refineries.
Ons gesels vanoggend oor brandstof. Die Clean Fuels 2 regulasies moet in Julie 2017 in werking tree, maar kenners sê hierdie sperdatum is nou onmoontlik. Ons verwelkom weer eens vir Kevin Baart, hoof van strategiese projekte by die Suid-Afrikaanse Brandstofbedryfsvereniging. Kevin, the Department of Energy is proposing that when the CF2 regulations are changed, they also make provision for the reintroduction of metal additives to unleaded petrol. What exactly would this mean if agreed to?
Well, that was one of the three major changes to the 2012 regulations, which I was talking about earlier. In the new regulations, what they've stated is that as soon as they're gazetted, it means that metal additives, in this case it's a manganese additive, will be allowed to be added to unleaded petrol up to a particular limit. Now, I know that the National Association of Automobile Manufacturers of South Africa, NAMSA, are dead against this. And there certainly some of our members do not like the idea of adding metals to fuel. The argument which NAMSA puts forward is that it clogs up catalytic converters and it leads to degradation of, in fact, your vehicle. So it's likely that they'll advise people who drive cars not to use not to use petrol, which contains metal additives. To a large extent, it's rather a moot point because we've got a pipeline between Durban and Johannesburg. And metal additives are actually refused. Transnet pipelines do not allow metal additives to be put in that pipeline. The reason being is jet fuel is also transported in that pipeline. So if it does happen, it will probably be in small quantities in isolated parts of the country.
Is that the pipeline that goes water and then petrol? Not that one.
No.
I've always heard about this pipe, and I was so fascinated all these years. Where's this pipe?
No, there's no water in that pipeline.
Okay. Now the question: a big thing was biofuel.
Yes.
But everyone expected it was going to explode. Did it like kind of faded? Biofuel? Is it still cleaner? Is it still?
Biofuel is still part of the Department of Energy's agenda.
Yes.
From the point of view of actually alleviating unemployment and generating industrial activity around the country. The only problem is that there isn't a proper pricing framework available around biofuels. So hence it hasn't really taken off. But what you do have is you've got individuals like you and me, so to speak, who make their own biofuels in their garages and put the biodiesel, made from used cooking oil, into their tank.
Yeah, you see, I thought that's going to be a big industry. Let's clean up my garage now.
But the problem is that the oil price, in fact, doesn't support it at this stage in time.
Yes.
It's only when we're talking about oil prices around $70, $100 a barrel, then you see it come in.
Yes.
And that's what we've seen actually overseas in the US, for example, and in Europe.
Very interesting.
What is your opinion on the reintroduction of metal additives to unleaded petrol?
We actually, Sapir, we don't prefer an opinion because some of our members are for, some of our members are against. So, and we try work on a consensus basis.
So it's a bit of a 50-50 case.
It's a bit of a 50-50 case, yes.
What would be the long-term effect of reintroducing metal additives, and could there be international consequences?
I can't see any international consequences associated with it, but a long-term effect, it's really sort of the effect on the motor vehicles if there is one. And for those, the motorists really needs to actually talk to talk to NAMSA and people like that, the real experts in the field who would advise them appropriately.
Ons gesels met Kevin Baart, hoof strategiese projekte se African Petroleum Industry Association.
Kevin Baart, hoof van strategiese projekte by die Suid-Afrikaanse Brandstofbedryfsvereniging, oftewel SAPIA, kuier vanoggend in die ateljee om te gesels oor brandstof en onder andere die Clean Fuels 2 regulasies wat in Julie 2017 in werking moet tree, maar volgens kenners is die sperdatum nou onmoontlik. Kevin, what is the effect of all of this on the consumer?
The effect at this stage in time is not much, if anything. The only thing what is happening is for those people who can sort of well afford it, they may not be able to get the so-called Euro 6 type of vehicles, which, the range of those vehicles in the country, because generally NAAMSA will actually only supply vehicles compatible to the current regulations. But that's not to say that they won't get it, because we do know that there are some of those vehicles traveling around.
What would you say is the biggest challenge in terms of this?
The biggest challenge really is trying to find a way in order to finance the necessary conversions which need to happen at the refinery level. That is really the key stumbling block, and that has in fact stopped the original 2012 regulations going ahead. Everything seemed to be going okay in terms of that, but unfortunately that hit a massive stumbling block. So all work on the refinery upgrades in fact stopped. If we can overcome that problem, and we're working with the Department of Energy to overcome that problem, then the refinery upgrades will proceed, and that will have further stimulus in terms of the economy, because it will actually it will promote manufacturing and things like that, and we can get those going, and everybody will be happy for it.
Any other possible solutions?
At this stage in time, we don't see any other possible solutions out there. I mean, the main thing is sort of we need financial assistance in order to get this.
A question that just came up in my mind is, people say that we can get much more cheaper petrol if we look like at Sasol or in exporting. Is that true or not? That we can really get it for much cheaper?
Not really.
Not really.
I mean,
no, it's a curveball question. I was just curious about it.
Sasol, they've got a facility at Secunda. They make fuel from coal type of thing. What will happen, economically? They're in fact a very small producer on a national scale. So what may happen, even if they could sell it less than, let's say, a BP or a Chevron, economically they wouldn't do that. And they would raise their price to meet that of BP and Chevron. But one must remember that fuel prices are regulated in this country, and because they're regulated, it means there's a limit in terms of what we can only charge what the government says we're allowed to charge, and that is based on an import parity type of basis. And because it's based on that, and because of the current fuel price regulation in the country, that is actually inhibiting the investment.
Okay. Are you driving a petrol or diesel car?
I drive, in fact, a diesel car.
I was just curious.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Maar ons sê baie dankie vir Kevin Baart, hoof van strategiese projekte by die Suid-Afrikaanse Brandstofbedryfsvereniging.